Welcome everyone to a brilliant episode of the ITSM Crowd. I am really looking forward to this one. My name's Claire Agutter. I'm going to be the host for today's session, and this one is all about ITIL. You might have heard, unless you've been living under a rock, that there is a new version of ITIL coming out very soon. So we thought what we'd do is take an opportunity to look at where ITIL actually came from. This is something that's been of huge significance for service management practitioners. It's been a massive part of my career. So it's a really nice opportunity to have a bit of a retrospective look at where ITIL's come from, where we are right now, and also where it's going as well. So I'm joined today by an amazing panel with, I dread to think how many years of ITIL experience between them. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So starting from the left on my screen, Ivor, if you'd like to say hello.
Hi. Yeah, I've been doing ITIL since 1989. Been involved in V1, V2, V3, all those kind of things. So just very old, not yet.
Career goals there. Thank you very much, Ivor. And Karen.
Yes, I've been involved. Well, I did my ITIL manager certificate as it was back then in 95. So I've been involved since then, and I've been involved with some of the publications and contributions to ITIL over the years. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Stuart.
Hello. Yes, I've been involved in ITIL about the same length of time as Kaz since kind of mid to late 90s. I did my manager certificate on V2 and then did all the V3 stuff. And I contributed to version 2 and version 3 and various other publications.
Thank you very much. So you'll spot there's a theme with our guests today. What we've done is we've invited people who have not just been involved with ITIL, but who've actually helped to shape ITIL by contributing to the ITIL publications. So, you know, in terms of the ITIL aristocracy, I guess we've got the cream of the crop here today. We are also going to take live questions throughout the broadcast if you've got anything that you would like to ask our panel. So if you just put your questions onto Twitter, use the hashtag ITSM Crowd. We will pick those up and we will get to them during the broadcast if we can. So I'll be keeping an eye on those as we go as well. I got involved with ITIL when it was version 2. So I took my V2 foundation when I was working on an IT help desk, and then very quickly progressed on to take my V2 managers. And since then, I've taken all of the ITIL V3 certs as part of my job as being a trainer. I've then taken a lot of other related service management qualifications. But for me, ITIL really kind of changed the course of my career, and it's been something I've been involved with for about 20 years now, but I didn't come in at the very beginning. So I'm going to ask you to kick us off, please, Ivor, and just share a little bit about version 1 of ITIL, where it came from, and what the reason for the creation of ITIL actually was.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't quite at the very beginning, but as they say in the trade, very close. I was working for the UK government civil service, and I did what people in big organisations do. I applied for a job because it was a promotion. And then after I got the job, I asked what it was. And I was in a branch, joined a branch called GITIM, the Government IT Infrastructure Management Method. And they had a silly corridor conversation, decided it wasn't going to be a method, it was going to be a collection of books. So they changed the name to the IT Infrastructure Library. A library is a collection of books. And what it was there for, the idea behind it was very simple. It became very clear to people in, well, a guy called Pete Skinner, who was the man who invented this idea, the real father of this idea. Peter realised that UK government was creating great software, but wasn't getting any benefit out of it. It wasn't running properly. So they decided that what they would do would go out to the private sector, because this was the height of Thatcherism. And therefore, private sector obviously got everything right. Public sector got everything wrong. This was edict from the top of government. So this branch was formed basically to go out and look at what private sector did, what good guys did, write that down, produce some books that UK government would then follow, so that we would actually deliver deliver services effectively. We didn't use that word so much then. How we actually make the good IT good and deliver value. We were right in some respects that UK government was abysmal at delivering IT. What we'd failed to spot was that practically everybody else was as well. So we started writing the books, and then people started knocking on our door from the private sector saying, this is good, we're going to buy this book. And including a little company from Holland called Pink Elephant, who said, can we sell your books in Holland? And we said, you can sell them anywhere you like. And so, to our surprise, these books of guidance we were writing, service level management, help desk was where we were starting, functional based books, not even process based, then functional based. These books started getting sold and picked up by the private sector, banking industry probably first, and the Netherlands, it just took to it like a duck to water. So we found that we were writing guidance that was being picked up by a much wider expectation than we had. We were all of us sort of tacitly sure that somewhere in the US there was something way better than this, and we were just doing some little British or European thing. And it was amazement when we discovered that we'd actually been the first people in the world to write it down. Now, if we'd thought that we were the first people doing this and it was going to be taken up around the world, for sure we would not have been allowed to do it. It really was, I think, an accident that there was such a big gap in the market that we happened to plug. But it happened, and it started selling, and it started taking up. So we started producing books. That's what the first book looked like.
Wow.
Very old, very naff, very 1980s. That's my one of the ones that I managed and made happen on testing. Well, we produced about 40 of these between 1989, the first ones came out, and we really finished. There was about 26 or so ITIL books. The biggest thing that I want to say before I run out of time here is that we produced the books, and this whole industry grew around it.
Yes.
We did feed the training industry. We funded the British Computer Society to have this good idea to write an exam. I sat the first exam in March 1991. And then other people started writing software around it. The first company to use ITIL terminology in their software, they went away and rewrote it to use ITIL terms, was Axios back in 1991. And then Ultracomp wrote Redbox around the way ITIL worked. And then, as you know now, lots of other companies are coming to do it. So the training industry came in around the core of the books. The software industry came in around the core of the books. Conferences started appearing. ITIMF originally started appearing. So what happened, which I think is a good handover into what version 2 picked up from, was the books became the core of a way, way bigger thing. And I wrote the marketing book back in the late 90s for version 1. And it was outsourced to Exin, and I was running it for them. I wrote in there that the books themselves, ITIL itself, is probably less than 3% of the ITIL-related turnover in the industry. And I think probably it's even bigger now. So that's an important thing that came out of ITIL, what this little kernel of the books turned into something way bigger. And so now people use the term ITIL to mean something actually a lot bigger than that collection of books. And I think that was the real strength of it, that it became this sort of self-managing community, as it were. And
I think community is a real big part of ITIL's success, because I know all the time I've been involved with it, that there always has been community and people collaborating on books and white papers. And, you know, even though it is this massive, huge financial beast, there is this real still strong sense of community, and that's important.
It was massively important at the beginning, and again we gave some seed corn to do this, to make the ITIMF, the user group, happen, and David Wielden actually made that happen in the end, along with a few other people, Ira Evans and others. But the books were written, my name was in this book. I didn't write it. We got some help to write it. I've written some other stuff, but I've always said that you could actually just take an extract from the phone directory and put it in an ITIL book, send it out for QA, and it will come back as a really good book. That was the strength of it. This massive community would look at it. And it wasn't that we deliberately wrote it badly. We did our best and put it out there, but it came back from QA massively better. And I think that community has taken us forward. And I think if we now you look at where version 2 and version 3 have taken us.
So tell us a little bit about the transition to version 2 then, Ivor, and then we're going to move on and Karen's going to share a bit about version 3.
The original outsourcing of ITIL, after we'd written the books, was in 1995. Went out to Exin and I went with it. And my job was to get the books rewritten. So I kicked that off. And then CCTA decided they shouldn't have outsourced it and brought it back in-house. So they took the work that I'd been doing and moved me out. Not that I'm bitter at all. They brought that work back in-house and then decided that instead of 20 books, they produce 5 bigger books. Something like that. And that then became a sort of internal project to take the guidance and move it from a functional based approach to a process based approach, which was modeling, mirroring the international standard. Well, first the British standard had been the first process focused approach, and that I think influenced very strongly where version 2 went.
Yeah, so that was BS 15,000 that became ISO 20,000, which is also being updated this year as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's in that as well. So V2, that was where I started with ITIL, and the kind of the main books then that formed the most of the training was service support and service delivery, and they were kind of the ITIL Bibles for me at the time. I had them in the boot of my car for such a long time for whenever I was working. But then we had 2007, was it, Karen? We moved on to version 3.
Was. Yeah, it's interesting thing you said, Claire, because a lot of people saw ITIL V2, and the panel can correct me, as the red and the blue book, service support, service delivery, and yet there was a lot more. In the life in that. I mean, planning to implement was one of the most important books.
That was always the best book in the V2 set, that green book.
Yep. Very few people knew about it. If you're talking about, the people side of change and organizational change and transitions, and that was the one to read. But most people just saw the red and the blue book. So 2007, version 3, I remember being very excited about hearing what was coming and being involved in it. And there was a fundamental shift that it went from, as I had said, like a shift from V1 to 2 to a process to a life cycle approach. So we came up or ended up with the 5 books, from strategy, design, transition, operation, and continual service improvement. And I still believe that was the right way to go. It did cause some deliberation, especially I think for the training organizations that had, with just operations and delivery, a fairly narrow and deep syllabus, if you like, if that's the word, to shallower and wider, because they had to cover like 26 processes across the whole of the life cycle. But I do believe that life cycle approach was the right thing to do. So where ITIL is today with version 3, I think it's interesting times. I think there's still a perception in the marketplace when you talk to people about ITIL, it's ITIL or, and I go, no, it's ITIL and.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we are doing ITIL, or we're not doing ITIL because we're doing X, or we're agile and we can't do ITIL. And there's still this perception. And you go back to version 1 of ITIL that always said from day one, adopt and adapt, adapt and adopt. This is what we've gathered, as Ivor said, we gathered this from what we believe successful organizations were doing in the area of, service management. And we pulled it together. So here you go. Here's what we believe is best practice. Fill your boots, pick what's fit for purpose, what works for you. And you can also, use other frameworks and approaches if you want. But for some reason, people have still gone, no, I've got to do it word for word. Whatever it says, that's best practice, therefore it's word for word. So I think that's still a challenge. One of the things we did a few years ago was the ITIL practitioner. And again, I was involved in that. I was one of the architects along with Stuart, and that was a really exciting piece of work. And that really was trying to help people who'd done some sort of training or certification and saying, okay, you know the theory, you understand what incident management is, you understand what service level management is, etc. Here's the piece that you need now in the jigsaw, if you like to say, where do I start back in the workplace?
Mm-hmm.
I love what I've learned, but what do I now do with it? Where do I start? You know, so it's not like start from scratch. It was no, you've got something in the organization. If your organization's not doing some sort of incident management and change management and problem management, they'd be out of business.
Yeah.
So you are doing something, however discombobulated it might be. So this is where you need to start, and these are the things you need to pull on. And what practitioner did was also pull in from Agile and Lean and DevOps, and started to talk about how you can integrate those sort of mindsets and thinking into service management. So it was moving towards more of a service management is a practice, if you like, underpinned by ITIL and things as well. So I think, I don't know what Stuart's going to say. I think him going forward, I'm hoping that, you know, we're going to have more emphasis on that integration and not stop talking about alignment. Alignment means go like this and we never, ever converge. It's integration, or that we come together and we can have the best of all worlds.
Yeah, and then so I think at the moment that's where we are. So we're on ITIL version 3, the 2011 version. So the original version.
So we had to upgrade in 2011. Yeah, that's
3.1, I guess. But
whoa, I'll have to say that.
fill all of our bookshelves, and I think just from a terminology perspective as well, where we are now is that ITIL is now just ITIL. It's no longer the IT infrastructure library, because there was this kind of feeling that maybe IT and infrastructure isn't all of what ITIL does. So ITIL's kind of a word now rather than an abbreviation.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bit like no one says international business machines anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
IBM's machines as an example.
Although I do know a few people who still call it ITIL, which it's getting rare.
It's one of the universals. It's ITIL almost everywhere in the world. There was only ever one place that translated it.
Yes, but the
let's not go there.
It's still, is it ITIL or ITIL?
Oh, well, we had the little book, so it was nice to say ITIL for that. But then beyond that, I'm an ITIL fan myself. But these are the big important questions.
Of course.
So if we move on to Stuart now, Stuart has been involved in ITIL practitioner. He was also involved as one of the Resilia authors, and he's now one of the lead architects for ITIL version 4. ITIL 4, it's not version 4, ITIL 4. It's still quite a lot of the information is under wraps. So Stuart's going to share what he can, but there may be some things that are not public information yet. But Stuart's kind of kindly agreed to talk to us about the future direction of ITIL while still respecting NDAs. So Stuart, I'll hand over to you at this point.
There's a challenge, isn't it?
Redacted.
So yeah, we can edit the video later. It's interesting listening to that evolution, because I think ITIL 4 will continue the evolution that we've seen already. I was really interested to see how we went from a very infrastructure focus with ITIL v1 and lots of separate stacks of this is what a service desk is, and then in v2 we tried to kind of tie it all together a bit more, but there was a very strong focus on the purpose of IT is to meet an SLA, and all these processes will enable you to meet your SLA, and if you've met your SLA, you've done everything you need to, and your customer will be happy. didn't kind of pan out that well, did it? I mean,
Yeah.
it did. But having said that, when I first learned about ITIL, most organizations that were running IT were quite anarchic. And it was techies doing what they thought was right. And actually bringing in a bit of discipline and a bit of process and a bit of measurement and a bit of reporting was very valuable at that time. It was a stage we needed to go through to get to where we went next. In ITIL v3, I think one of the most important things that changed was the definition of a service. And that was important because we started talking about value finally. We moved from saying, if you've met your SLA, you've done what you need to if you've delivered value to your customers, you've done what you need to. And that was a very different perspective. It meant that you could no longer really, if you adopted it wholeheartedly, you could no longer hide behind an SLA and say, we've delivered the SLA, go away. Because the purpose of what you were doing was to actually create value by making services happen. And I think going into the future, we're going to see more of that there will be a much bigger value focus and a value system focus within ITIL. We're moving away from a focus on doing the processes. I'm doing incidents, you're doing problems, she's doing changes, towards a much more integrated value system. We are working together to create value for our stakeholders, some of whom are customers, some of whom are not customers. And that value creation is facilitated by things that we call incident and problem and change management. But those aren't goals, and none of them stands alone. They're all part of an integrated system. So you can see how that's kind of not a sudden change. It's an evolution. Similarly, if we look at what happened when we brought in ITIL Practitioner, one of the bits of ITIL Practitioner that I think has gone down best in the marketplace is the guiding principles. This was, we'd always said to people, adopt and adapt, and never told them how or what we really meant. We'd said, well, adopt and adapt means you take the bits you like and you change them to work for you. With Practitioner, we introduced this idea of guiding principles, things like focus on value, work holistically, keep it simple, collaborate. And we talked about what they meant, and we talked about how you could take these guiding principles and rather than saying adopt and adapt, we said, right, focus on value. That means everything you need to do, you need to understand how is this creating value for somebody. We said work holistically, which meant get away from focusing on your silo and think about how you fit into an end-to-end value. Again, that whole idea of guiding principles that will help you tie it all together is coming forwards as a really core part. It's not going to be in a separate publication. Absolutely at the core of ITIL. You have a system, it creates value, it's based on principles. So,
because I think from speaking from the perspective of a training provider as well, some of our customers I don't think understood how Practitioner fitted in with the rest of ITIL, and I think that was a real shame because some of the value that Practitioner should be delivering was maybe missed a little bit because of that.
So at the time we produced Practitioner, and Karen will back me up on this, I think a bunch of us sat around the table and said, what's missing? Where does ITIL need to go next? So we didn't really think about it in relation to an exam system. We thought about it in relation to guidance. What do people need to know? And the Practitioner exam has always been a bit odd, the way it sits at the side of the exam system as a, you might want to think about doing. Whereas now those ideas of systems approach, guiding principles become the core of ITIL, not something else at the side. We still have incident management and problem management and all of those things, but there's much less focus on them. And what do I mean by much less focus? You know the way people have misused ITIL in the past? They've gone into an ITIL book and they found a flowchart. The first step of incident management will be this. Every one of those said, here's an example, but people ignored that. They examined that. They tried to implement that, whether or not it was the right flowchart for their business. It was never intended that way. 3/4 of what was in the current ITIL books was examples and have gone forwards into exams, into canon, into, I don't mean into David Cannon, I mean into one of the authors. But so what we're trying to do with things like incident management, we'll pare it back a bit. We'll give if we're going to give examples, they won't be in the core guidance because of the way they've been misused in the past. What we'll write in the core guidance is what incident management is about, why you're doing it, how it creates value, how it contributes to your overall system. But don't expect the next version of ITIL to have a flowchart that says the first step of incident management is this, the second step is this, the third step is that, the fourth step is the other, because it's no longer an appropriate way of guiding people.
Yeah.
It got misused for a long time. I don't know if you can hear the phone ringing, but hopefully somebody, if nobody answers it, it'll cut across to the voicemail in about 10 seconds. What else? I'm just trying to think. Yeah, the other thing, the mistake with the process-based approach is that we had functions and we had processes, and they were kind of almost separate, weren't they? We're looking now at saying, whatever you do, you need to think of it from a people and organizational perspective, from an information and technology perspective, from a partners and suppliers perspective, from a value stream and process perspective and an activity perspective, for everything, not just sometimes we're doing functions and then we'll talk about organizations and people, and sometimes we're doing processes and then we'll talk about activities. But if you're talking about incident management, then what does incident management mean in terms of organizations and people? And what does it mean in terms of partners and suppliers? And what does it mean in terms of activities and processes and the value system? So you'll find it's a lot more integrated. Things like the service life cycle will be going forwards in a slightly, different form, but not as the core of what we're talking about. It'll be much more around building a system that creates value for your stakeholders. And I've probably already said far more than I should have done, so I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes.
But I love that idea, and I think one of the reasons ITIL often gets criticised is it's seen as being too bureaucratic and too rigid, whereas in fact I think what you've just got there is the fact that organisations have been doing this for, in some instances, decades, and adding bits without taking anything away. And when one of the DevOps conferences I was at, somebody said that process is scar tissue that organisations build up over time, which made huge amount of sense. So maybe ITIL 4 is that opportunity to kind of go back to first principles and say, well, what were we actually trying to achieve with change management when we brought it in? Because it wasn't about the forms, it was about protecting our services, and it was about delivering value. So that sounds like a really positive step to me.
I hope it will go down well. I'm really pleased with where we've got to. I am sure people will criticize it. However much time and effort you put in, they'll find the spelling errors and the grammar errors and the bits they don't agree with, and that's fine. That's life.
And where's my flowchart?
Yes, there will be some where's my flowchart, but you know how those flowcharts have been misused.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Both in training and in exams and in implementations.
Correct.
Yeah, there is definitely no one size fits all, and I think as the world moves on as well, and more process is automated as well, the whole flowchart becomes less meaningful, and I think that's where elements of DevOps thinking do come in, and automated delivery pipelines and things don't fit with your twice weekly change advisory board anymore.
And that's why everything needs to be looked at through an information and technology lens, as well as through an activity and process lens and an organization and people lens, because you can't you can't use them one at a time. It's like the guiding principles. You don't say, I'm going to focus on value today, and then tomorrow I'll think holistically, and then the day after I'll collaborate. You've got to do all of them all the time,
Absolutely agree. Just a question then. The guiding principles, is there anywhere, because I think people should download them and put them on the wall. Is there anywhere that they can go and get them?
Oh, I think you can there used to be a downloadable document on the Axelos website, but I'd have to search for it. You carry on talking amongst yourselves and I'll have a little search.
Well, we're coming to the end, so we're going to be wrapping up anyway, but that'll probably be my top tip for somebody, would be to go find those guiding principles, put them on your wall, just to remind you.
Stuart said, I was one of the architects as well, along with Stuart, and coming up with those guiding principles. I mean, we could have had a list, as we had a list of consolidated, and in my head, they became so powerful that if you look at those principles and just say, am I ticking those boxes? I want to do X at the start. Let's go to the source. Let's see what's really happening. Is this adding value? If you tick all those boxes, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and it's again in this spirit of kind of learning from other ways of working. It's things like the improvement kata. It's repeating these things until they become habit and doing them every day. Not reading the book once and thinking, oh, well, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it's nice from the very beginning to come back and see we've gone in a constructive full circle, because the things that Stuart's saying, we actually were saying back in 1990, that here is advice, here is guidance, got to think about all of them. And one of the last blogs I had published to Fresh Service, I think, Iron Age ITIL, saying exactly what Stuart's just been saying there. You need to think about functions, and you need to think about process, you need to think about service, you need to think about people, all of them, all the time. That's what we were trying to say before, and it got drifted off into people seeing it as Holy Writ.
It's hard though, isn't it?
Holy Writ now is to say, think for yourself.
We're coming to the end of time, but I've just got one question that's coming on Twitter, which I'm going to put to you, Stuart, but if it's not something that you can answer at the moment, feel free to say. But somebody's asking, does ITIL 4 reference SIAM, DevOps, Lean, anything else that's happening in the industry at the moment?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
I mean, sure, it will incorporate ideas from all of those things. Nobody could sit down and write a publication about how to manage IT services that doesn't reflect what's happening in the world, could they?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think coming back to Ivor's original bit of history as well, it's fascinating to me how much good stuff has come out of public sector, because it was ITIL, Prince 2, SIAM has originated in UK government and public sector as well. And I think it's interesting that maybe these places where the budgets are tight but the value still has to be delivered, that really drives people to think differently. But we're going to have to wrap up now, unfortunately. That's been absolutely brilliant for me.
A quick question for you. Is there an easy way to share a URL with the people watching the Hangout?
We can put the URL up on Twitter under the ITSM Crowd hashtag, and we'll also put a blog live after this podcast as well.
Because
so if you can send me the
I've posted
link.
a link there for you for the 9 guiding principles, but I don't think people can see it from where I've posted it.
Perfect. I will pop that into the blog, and we'll also be transcribing this episode as well. So if people aren't comfortable with video format, you'll be able to read it too. Not enough time, there never is, but we found that 30 minutes is pretty much optimal for these. But thank you so much to Ivor, to Karen, and to Stuart. Best of luck finishing ITIL 4, Stuart, and we're all really looking forward to reading it. Thank you very much, and I will see you all on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd.
Thank you.